All right, everyone, thank you so much for joining us today for another Smith.ai Masters Series webinar. I am Maddy Martin. I'm the VP of Marketing for Smith.ai. We are a 24/7 virtual receptionist service handling calls, chats, texts, and Facebook messages for businesses. We do answering, screening, scheduling, and intake, and a whole lot more. So if you're not familiar with us, check us out, Smith.ai. One of the reasons why we put on these educational programs is to just provide more services than those direct receptionist and chat services, to really wrap around and support our businesses that we serve. So today, the topic is measuring what matters from search to fee, presented by Gyi Tsakalakis of AttorneySync. I will let Gyi introduce himself in just a moment, but just wanted to cover the outline of today's talk, which is really focused on diving deeply into how design, measurement, and tracking systems can provide insight into how clients are searching, finding, and hiring you, so that we are focused on the metrics that matter most, and not just those that are sort of presented to us most often, like impressions and clicks and rankings. Like, really, this is about measuring what moves the needle and what you can really stake your business on. So we'll cover today UTM parameters, call tracking, configuring Google Analytics goals, how to connect the front-end marketing metrics to back-end business metrics, and then how to analyze that data to improve the conversion rate from search to hire, or to buy if you're in a product-driven business. But before we get into it, Gyi, just introduce yourself and let's hear a little bit about your story.
Sure. So in a former life, I was a trial lawyer at a small plaintiff's firm. And as a young lawyer, started to get this, I'll date myself a little bit, like, early 2000s, mid 2000s. We get questions about like, what should we be doing online? And so that exploration became the genesis for my company, AttorneySync, where we do digital marketing. It's funny, I say digital marketing agency, but as we'll talk about today, so much of what we do is really like business intelligence, because we're connecting the dots from potential clients all the way to fees, so you can conduct things like return on investment, return on ad spend. Needless to say, thank you so much for having me here today. We're customers of Smith. We love Smith, big advocates of Smith, and we'll talk about some of the ways that we use Smith in this process as well. And yeah, looking forward to doing it.
Awesome. All right, thanks, Gyi. Well, feel free to share your screen and let's get into it.
Okay, here we go. See how this sharing works. Oh, boom, it remembered where I set it up last time. So perfect. Right on it. So as Maddy mentioned, we're going to be talking about measuring what matters from search to fee. We're really going to focus on the search component of this. There are a lot of different things that you can measure across channels. I think part of this is like kind of keeping it simple for folks. I also encourage people, if you have questions, whether you want to drop them in the chat or follow up, like I'd love for this to be super actionable and practical, especially for those live attendees.
Yeah, totally. Put it in the chat, or you can use the Q&A and I'll keep an eye on it, and I will bring them up to Gyi throughout the presentation.
Yep. And don't worry, we will get you these decks, or this deck. So if you want to follow up, I did include some links in some of the slides. That's me in case you're trying to put letters to my name. I'm also a co-host of Lunch Hour Legal Marketing and on the ABA Tech Show planning board. So we hope to see you at Tech Show this year, hopefully as the world continues to open up and everybody's getting vaccinated. Okay, so let's start with some data. I'm a big Clio Legal Trends Report person. I think validating like the why behind why I'm going to recommend some of this stuff makes a big difference. And so the Legal Trends Report data in general is really, really valuable. I mean, you could build your whole marketing plan around what the folks at Clio have presented to us. But the big headline here is about half people look for a referral, half search on their own. How do they do that? They break it down. I was joke around with George and the folks at Clio. Even a lot of those referrals are probably happening online, but they didn't. That's not like kind of a follow-up. But we're really going to focus today on tracking and measuring performance from search to a website, from a search engine to their website. It has applications to ads, but again, because we're going to throw a lot at you, I really wanted to zero in on the search stuff, because search does tend to be more high intent, higher conversion. You're getting in front of people when they're looking for what you're looking for. We'll talk about some of the ways you can even improve that towards the end. But the real focus here is to say, hey, look, when someone searches for a divorce lawyer near me and some listings come up in Google, how do we get all the way back to return on investment, fees generated from those searches? And, I just use this example from Lawmatics, but I really want this, when you're conceptualizing this, it can be any software. Like we consider ourselves platform agnostic, where it's like, look, whatever CRM you're in, whatever tracking tools you want to use, there's ways to get this stuff implemented. So just because I show examples of certain software, don't freak out and think, oh, I got to switch all my software. These, most of these major softwares will do this. And those that don't, I'll give you some examples of things you can use. But the real takeaway here that we want to get to is to be able to say, do we have a way to say, okay, here are people that searched for this, whatever, if it's a non-brand query, or they searched on my name or my firm name, and getting them through a system and a process to track that they actually turned into a client. And then how do we actually measure some of the metrics that are valuable in that journey? So that's what we're going to do. So here is, and I will, I'd love for this to be conversational as well, even with you, Maddy. So if you've got things to fill in on, feel free to interrupt me anytime. I know I can tend to be a little ranty and long-winded, but the big overview here is this. We're going to start thinking about search, configuring Google My Business, primarily Google My Business, adding UTM parameters so that in Google Analytics, Search Console, call tracking, places like Smith, your calendaring is collecting this data that you can then add to connect to your business metrics on the back end, in, whether it's your CRM or your practice management tool, but really taking that whole connection from a search, collecting the data, getting it into a place where it's usable, and then spitting out a report that can tell you some really valuable insights in terms of performance of your marketing. Because again, all this stuff, marketing people will say, oh, look, we got you 1,000 impressions. Like, think about that awareness. Well, if you're not connecting that to that something in terms of a potential client inquiry, at least, and ideally a fee, you don't really know what it's doing. And so that's really the goal of today's quick talk.
So the only thing, Gyi, that I would ask you here, when you say client fee in the lower row, are you also including like those intake forms and things like that?
Totally, and we'll talk about the different intake mechanisms. The big three that I always think about are web forms, phone calls, and live chat requests. And so we'll talk about those. And so, those are, and I put these dotted lines in, there's some overlap here because some of this stuff you can actually even track, whether it's in something like CallRail or Smith probably has some reporting that you can talk about before you even get to the CRM. And so it's the search, it's the inquiry, whether that comes from a phone call, a form fill, or a chat request. And then it's the, we'll call it the potential client or client record that lives in your CRM, and how do you, track and move those people through. But, a lot of folks, we even talk about this, will say, look, I know my numbers. My big number is target cost per valid lead. And so if that becomes your number, you can even start to measure and monitor that before you even get to your CRM. With things like combination of some of the configurations we're talking about in Google Analytics and call tracking. So, but that's the big, and you mentioned this at the outset, the big thing to get away from is to say, yeah, my marketing people are telling me we got all these impressions or we've got these rankings. And for those, we probably should define some of these terms. Impressions is just like your ad showing up in front of somebody. We'll leave it at that. A click is someone actually clicking on an ad or a Google My Business listing or some kind of search listing. But we love to report on that stuff. We love to report on impressions and clicks, but those are really just indirect metrics. They're not even really performance metric there. It's got to be tied to something that has some meaningful business meaning, for lack of a better way of saying it, for your firm.
Right. And a lot of it is like, well, how long of a rope are you going to, hang yourself with? Because every company you're going to use will give you tons of, like, I'm thinking Facebook ads. Every single ad platform is going to let you add as many conversions as you want, and all the engagement metrics, the video views and the watch time. But what does that actually mean? They're going to show you every column you could possibly imagine and then some, but it actually takes looking into this stuff to say, what is that actual funnel? Where does that matter? Because if a funnel were 100 engagements long, none of us would, be in business. It would be untenable. So what are those things that are maybe 5 or 6 actions at most that give you a sense of like, those are the key points that you need to check in on? And that's really where this comes into play. Like, how many people are seeing it fine? How many people are clicking who are within that segment of keywords that relate to high intent or medium intent, where you're like, all right, that's reasonable that that person is going to hire my firm or buy my product. And then they fill out the form, or they only fill it out halfway. What are you going to do about it? They call. Do they have a qualified conversation? Do they schedule an appointment? Is it a sincere and qualified conversation? And where do they prefer to come in? And then also, and this is something that we look at Smith.ai, how are you getting back to them? So often, and in the Clio report, they talk about this too, that a lot of people were actually emailing in and they were getting an email back that said, thanks for your message, call us. Or we're calling in and we're getting some like automated, text back. Here's the link to book time. And it's like, you're obfuscating like what that person's message is, which is, I prefer the original channel that I'm using to reach out to you, and would like for you to not impose your preference on me. So we can talk about that a little bit later too.
Awesome. Yep, definitely. So let's start with, getting to what we promised in the webinar takeaways. Urchin tracking module parameters, or UTM parameters. Super exciting. But here's the problem, as technical and gobbledygook as this seems, this is very key to being able to track clicks around the web. So if if your goal is to track, like someone clicked on my Google My Business listing, came to my website, filled out a form and became a client, this little UTM thing is really, really important. We're not going to spend a ton of time on the UTMs, but just know that there are 5 major ones that people typically use: source, medium, campaign, term, content. Source and medium are the real keys, in my opinion, because that's going to be like, if we're talking Google My Business, you might say Google UTM source, medium, organic, UTM, campaign, GMB. And I'll show you the example of this, but that's going to be able to help you isolate your Google My Business metrics independently of other search sources. So like other, if you're ranking in traditional reports, again, we got the link in there of what these are. The good news also is you don't have to be a coder or anything. You can literally use this free campaign builder tool. It prompts you for each of the different parameters. Ultimately, what you're going to do is you're going to create a new URL that you're going to use in your Google My Business dashboard. So that little snippet there, that little URL with the parameters on it, that's the trick to get from Google My Business into Google Analytics and into Search Console, which will help you do some of the things that Maddy and I mentioned, with identifying search queries that are actually turning into clicks, calls, and eventually fees. So that's the starting point. UTM parameters, that's what it is. It's if you're not using UTM parameters, I'd highly recommend you start implementing this. Again, we're going to talk search, but this same thing applies to Facebook URLs. If you're doing email marketing, really anything that you want to track a click, get those UTM parameters in place. That's just what it shows up like in Search Console. So you can actually isolate that page and that you're just looking at data around your Google My Business listing. So that was really fast on UTM parameters. We're going to tie this all together, but I'm going to break down each of the things we talked about in the agenda first, and then we'll show you how they all work together. The second thing is call tracking. So in Google My Business, you can put a call tracking number in as your primary business number. And then as long as you put your local real phone number after that as the alternative, that's our 773 number, you're not going to run into what the local SEO people would call a NAP inconsistency problem. We've been doing this for years now, and it works really, really well. But what this allows you to do is you can track phone calls directly from Google My Business, even if someone doesn't click on it and click through to your website. And people don't realize that, but I'm always astonished by how many people actually call right from the search result. In fact, once you implement this, I think you'll probably be surprised for yourself of like how many people are calling you, whether they search for your name or your firm name or one of these non-brand queries. Oftentimes they never even get to your website. They literally call from the results that show up on that search result. This allows you to track that. And that's just showing how it shows up in, that's the best practice way in my view of how to do it. Dedicated call tracking number, real local business number as the additional phone number. Now you've got call tracking in place. So I also want to kind of show how because we, like I mentioned, we're customers of Smith. We also use CallRail. So what we do is we use a dedicated GMB tracking number from CallRail that forwards to our Smith number. And so what that does is it allows us to parse calls that are going to Smith by source from our website and from our GMB listing. And again, to Maddy's point, this is a really valuable way for us to like make sure that, hey, not only are we seeing just the raw numbers of impressions, clicks, and calls we're getting, but we're also able now to respond very quickly because Smith's on it. Smith also for us has some really other nice integrations because they work right inside of our active campaign, which is our CRM. And so we can close that loop from search to call to take a message if we're not available or try to do live transfer. And then that record shows right up in our CRM from Smith. We're closing the loop on that engagement like right away.
Awesome. Love it. And I just shared in the chat, and I'll share in the recap, a help doc that shows best practices for Smith.ai and CallRail. If you have like a whisper sync or things like that added, sometimes it can make it difficult for us to answer, or there are ring delays that we find. So we actually did a webinar with CallRail, and that document is actually like a collaboration with us and them. So put a lot of time into making sure that it works as smoothly and as quickly as possible to get the call from them to us.
Awesome. Finally, Google Analytic goal conversion. So, a lot of people talk about analytics and they talk about sessions and users and, bounce rates. And there's all this, as Maddy mentioned, there's all these different things you can find in analytics, but so few people actually configure goal conversions. And so, for me, what I really focus on, the first one there is the CallRail first-time caller. So all we've done is we've said, look, when we have the CallRail instance configured with Google Analytics, we create an event goal for CallRail. Again, the documentation is pretty straightforward on this on Analytics. I add a link in here as well so you can see it. But this filters for all of the first-time callers to our website or to our GMB listing. It helps screen out, if you get repeat callers from existing clients or from opposing counsel or from the court, it's not always a one-for-one, and not every call is obviously going to be a client, but this is a really effective way to track directionally if you're seeing a growth in those first-time callers by source in your analytics data. We also do one for our Calendly configuration, Facebook, same thing, Google Ads extension. And then of course, we also have our web form goal in there. That's a destination goal, which essentially what that does is it tracks a goal every time someone fills out the form and is redirected to a thank you page. And now again, we can see, hey, this session, this user with this contact record that goes into our CRM, they came from either, our Google organic, or they came from our GMB listing, or they came from a Facebook ad. But this is how you can connect that UTM parameter in analytics to an identifiable goal. Maddy, this might be a good opportunity too. You can create, because Smith does events, I understand, through chat, you could configure a goal conversion for chat requests that come to your website.
Yes, so I'm sharing the link also in the chat, and what you can do, and I'll share it in the recap as well. We actually have a number of different events that can fire for Google Tag Manager and Google Analytics. And what that means is that you can actually track when a chat widget has opened, closed, when they have signed up, when the conversation started. So sign up means they put in their name and email. You see the chat even on this page. When they have engaged, so they started a conversation, there's a greeting that shows did they actually put in at least one message, and then was it closed. So what we do is we know that about a quarter of our website visitors are interested in starting Smith.ai services, maybe another quarter are existing clients, and then the rest is a mix, but some are hiring applicants and things like that. So what we do is say rough cut, Gyi, just as you were talking about, what is the traffic, what is the engagement rate, and then we know about a quarter of those are going to be inquiring about our services. And how does that track with the calls that are coming in, with the clicks from organic and paid? Like, are those ratios right? And it really gets down to the ratios. Like, if I add more traffic, if I buy it or if I generate it through SEO, is it as high quality or higher than what I have been getting historically to those maybe same landing pages that I've always used? So no baseline change, just new inputs. Can I predict and get the same result that I want for more business?
Love that. And again, I always tell this little story, but when I first, 2008, and we started, when chat was first becoming a thing, I was very skeptical about chat in general. I was like, people don't really want to use it. And I was totally wrong. I mean, and this goes back to something that Maddy said earlier, but give people options to interact with your firm in the ways that are convenient for them, right? And so, you might not use chat, right? You might not be someone that actually likes using chat on websites, but there are a lot of people that do. And a lot of the data that we've looked at, people always get concerned, well, is it going to cannibalize phone calls or web forms? It really doesn't. It really just helps grow conversion across the board.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And we see, if you're wondering like, all right, how many chats am I actually going to get? It's about 1 chat for every 4 calls, and maybe, 1 to 2 ratio when it comes to form fills. So what we find is that, yes, it's net new, vast majority of the time. And it's also those people who, especially when you're working in law or finance or medicine, anything health related where there are sensitive subjects, especially when people are now working from home, and they have a lot of sort of like distractions, channel switching, you're on the call and then you get in the car, can I text you later, etc. A couple things to look out for is, one, is their contact information up front, because unlike a call, there are chat solutions that will not always have like the name and email captured at the start of the conversation. So that's something that I think is important that we do, no matter if it gets disconnected, you've got that name, email, phone number. But then also, are you enabling a quiet, discreet conversation if you have a sensitive client base, or your client base is dealing with sensitive issues where they don't want to be overheard, or it's inappropriate to be overheard by coworkers or children or parents, etc. So that's a consideration as well, as in addition to the overall metrics lift.
Really good points there. Okay, so now as we promised, we're going to try to start connecting some of this stuff from search to click, call, contact, all the way to client. So this is just an example. Now, if you have a UTM parameter that we talked about earlier with the campaign set GMB, you can go in and say, hey, look, show me visitors to my site that came from Google Organic with the GMB campaign. And now I'm saying, okay, look, I can see that my Google My Business listing generated 20 web form fills over this time frame. And so again, now you're really starting to say, okay, I've got the total number of people who clicked through from GMB. I can look at the conversion rate to web forms, and then I can look at those. When I get those web forms into a CRM, I can start to say, okay, of those web forms that came through, how many of those actually turned into clients? And so that gives you a really good benchmark to try to continue to improve, growing that targeted GMB traffic, converting more of that traffic to a web form or a live chat or a phone call, and then actually measuring, okay, look, we spent, whether you're doing it yourself and you're spending time, or you're outsourcing and working with somebody, they're spending money. Now you can actually quantify the value of the time and money you're spending on these marketing activities all the way back to potential clients and ideally fees. This is another example from Lawmatics. Again, you can add most of the major CRM and practice management tools have ways to get a source in from a UTM parameter. But again, this, just to give you the example from Lawmatics, add a new marketing source. All you're going to do is say anything that matches the source that you've added as a UTM parameter, that'll populate the source inside the CRM. An example from Active Campaign. When you click through on these touch points, you can actually see more granular detail, but you can add conversion values. So you can say, look, I know on average that a qualified potential client from this practice area tends to have this value for my firm. And now you can build reports around, predicted pipeline of new business coming in by channel, by source, by medium. And then you can reallocate resources and deploy resources to maximize your spending time and money on the things that are working best for you. So for those that might be a little bit confused about how all that got tied together, really all it's doing is this. You put a tracking number for GMB direct calls. When someone clicks that call button right there, that's going to generate a phone call for you, just to give you a practical application so you can see it in the search results. And again, that's happening because behind the scenes, you've done this in your GMB dashboard. If you go into CallRail, you can look at phone calls by different phone numbers. There's all sorts of different reports you can build in CallRail as well. And then when you add this to Search Console, you see that when someone clicks on one of those listings for a search on whether it's your name, firm name, in this case, my business name, with these UTM parameters, again, connecting it all together, now I can see phone calls that came from Google My Business. I can see the different goal completions, whether it's a phone call or a form fill, directly to the GMB campaign. And then this in Search Console, this is where I think this can be really beneficial in terms of understand the queries that are leading to business for you. If you go into Search Console and just filter for that specific page with the UTM parameter, you can go in and say, okay, these are the specific searches that people performed. I can see my impression numbers. I can see my average position numbers in Google My Business. And you can tie it back. If someone clicks through, you can tie it back, the same thing we were talking about before, all the way to a conversion in analytics. And now you can say, these organic search queries actually turned into potential clients and fees. And so, hey, these are the ones that actually have the most value to my business, not just all of, we see a lot of agencies report on, oh, well, your search impressions are up and your traffic's up, but like, are they actually turning into new business? That's the question that this really helps you understand and answer.
Well, one of the things that we see so often is like, there's this stopping point where you've got the quality, you know that this channel is working for you, but there's intermittent performance or inconsistent performance. And that's often where people will bring in Smith.ai and say, I realized after listening to my phone calls, because that's another key activity here, when we're looking at quality, if you listen to your calls and you say like, some of these are being mishandled, or the friendliness isn't really quite where we want it to be, or the proactive prompt to sounds like I need to get you in touch with one of the attorneys at the firm, or can we schedule you for a consultation? Maybe how they deal with objections to paying for consultation fees. Is your staff equipped with those sort of responses and that sales approach to that? If they're not, there are a lot of different factors to go in here. So if you have a funnel like Gyi is talking about building, you can say, where are the weak points? I had 100 leads come in, and then 50 of those were generated from calls. Of those 50 calls, did 20 of them turn into like qualified consultations? Oh, you charge for consultations, they were paid, and then what happened to the rest? Why did they not move forward is also a really important thing to look into, to say, is there room to optimize that without spending more money to get more leads and get more calls? What can you do first there before you add more into that funnel?
No, 100%. I mean, we always tell people, fix their experience first before you invest more money, because if you just pouring more media dollars or visibility, awareness, whatever, into a leaky funnel, you're never gonna solve that problem. And in fact, it's most of the time, and this is what we're going to talk about now, is if you focus on improving the conversion, you can actually get a lot better result with the same investment, or even sometimes even less. So let's talk about some of the things that go into that from a search perspective. So just an example search, Chicago divorce lawyer. When I talk about these localized non-branded searches, there are really 4 things that kind of start this improving conversion. And so if we're getting in the mindset here of improving conversion, we're thinking about what are things I can do that are going to increase the likelihood that someone who's doing this search is likely to contact me, click through to my website, call me, engage with a messaging app or a chat request. What are the things we can do? So that starts by looking at actually what they see in the search results. And so the number one thing, I think, at the risk of stating the obvious, is reviews, right? People choose businesses on reviews. They want to see what your happy customers and clients are saying about you. That's the number one thing you can impact. The second thing is probably category, because if you get a search that doesn't match the category, it probably turns off the searcher, because they're like, oh, I'm searching for a divorce lawyer, but it says personal injury lawyer. We see this happen a lot, especially for firms that have multiple practice areas. If you're not doing a one-to-one match on your search categories, your GMB categories to the searches, that can be a place that diminishes the likelihood that they convert into a contact. Hours of operation is a big one. This is another thing that we really love about Smith, because remember, people do not just call you on your schedule. So if you're putting your hours of operation 9 to 5 and your competitors have 24-hour answering, like because they're using a virtual receptionist or something else, that's a huge competitive advantage because people want to call after hours. And so that's another thing you can do to impact conversion from search results. And the final thing we'll talk about are enhancements. And so the enhancements are things like on-site services or remote appointments. And there are a couple other enhancements that we can talk about in terms of things that come through from Google Posts. But these are the things that can really move the dial on conversion. It's not enough just to rank here. You've got to be doing things that help you stand out from your competitors on these search results.
So Gyi, I think one of the other things here that just comes to mind is the aspect of control. So I think many of us, if not all of us, are a little bit intimidated by, like, what can we control within the Google sphere? And one of the things you can control, well, actually many of these are things that you can control. When we talk about the hours and taking the time to find the right category and making sure that you ask for those reviews, those are all small things that add up to a sum that's greater than their parts, right? And it's about really solid daily work habits. It's about a team that knows what their priorities are. And so many of these things get written off in favor of larger projects. Oh, I didn't ask for reviews this week, I'll do it next week. Well, then it becomes a quarter where you didn't ask for reviews, because it's easy to shrug that off to the next week. And it's really hard when your competition is doing this repeatedly. They're taking those 5-10 minutes to say, you know what, I'm going to send off an email to that person who expressed a lot of happiness and gratitude and see if they'll write a review, or automate it even better yet with a personalized message. On the hours, you can skip rank here. You might be, Jonathan Morel, and feeling like, why aren't I in the first position? But you might actually get more overall calls because you're open 24 hours and you're telling the world that you have a high number of reviews. Even though you're 4.7, which is not the highest, and you're third on the list, you might actually get the most calls here because overall 24/7, you're most available, and people want an attorney or a service provider who's available.
Right. And remember, when we do this, I just happened to do this search at a time, obviously the other two businesses weren't closed, but if I had called after, or if I'd done this search after 6 p.m. or after 5:30, both of those listings ahead of Jonathan Morel
would show closed.
Both closed. And we see this all the time where people are running actual ads, like they're spending money on ads to advertise they're closed.
There's a big red message in your ad that says you're closed, right?
Turn off your ad.
Right.
Anyway, so again, the more that you can maximize those hours of operation, you're just providing a better experience to potential clients who are interested in your services as well. And, so another example here that for these enhancements, look, people that, especially when we were going through lockdown periods, or, people still reluctant to come in, Google My Business has an enhancement where you can say, we take online appointments. Think about the impact on conversion when you're offering online appointments and your competition's not, and you're actually promoting that in your Google My Business listing. So there's another thing you can do to help stand out. It's really about standing out in these results to motivate people to contact you. Another thing that people don't realize is there are filters, right? So this goes back to that same thing, but a search on an iPhone, Google will prompt you with these filters. So like if you're available online, proximity matters a lot, whether or not you're open, your ratings. All of these things are things, as Maddy mentioned, you can influence that can really help you stand out, and are competitive advantages in terms of increasing the conversion from a search to a click or a call or a chat request. And then I wanted to highlight this one. So that one at the bottom there, how should you hire a digital legal marketing agency? That's a post that I added to Google My Business. That's another thing that will jump off of a search result page. So if you're a blogger or you're adding content to your website, make sure you're also adding that to a post in Google My Business, because that will oftentimes can influence having an enhancement on your listing in a search that can really jump off the page to grab somebody's attention. This is just an example of posts in the feed. So if you're doing like, if you take a leadership position at an organization, or you work at a nonprofit, or you're doing good work in your community, those are all great opportunities to highlight in your post. So when people search on your name, they're more likely to see this stuff, click on it, call you. You can do video testing depending on which state you're in. You can get video testimonials of clients singing your praises in this area. Really, really powerful graphical, visual ways to demonstrate your expertise, let people know what you're all about. And it really does greatly enhance and increase conversion from clicks and calls on these listings.
So Gyi, I have one question here. So
Yep.
if you set up the UTM parameters on your main link going to AttorneySync. Now, if I click on how should you hire a digital legal marketing agency, are those UTM parameters also passing through if I convert from that article?
That's a really great question. And you have to add the UTM parameters to the individual posts. So it's the same thing, but the short version is any place that you can add a link in your Google My Business listing, you want to be using a UTM parameter. And then you can, this is the thing we always tell people is like test different, stages of the funnel. So you might have some awareness type posts that are just like really like, low intent, but just awareness, like why you practice. And then you might have some lower ones that might talk about fees or like competitive advantages or unique selling propositions. But once you have those parameters in place, you can run a report and say, hey, which ones of these offers tended to generate the most attention from a click standpoint, and even from a call standpoint and conversion standpoint back on your website. So really good point. UTM everything, UTM all the things.
Awesome.
This is just an example from a firm here around me, but they do a scholarship. They do a lot of frequent information. That kind of stuff are great candidates for testing in your posts. And again, if you think about it, as you start to develop a reputation, develop a, as the marketing people would call a personal brand, you should start to see that searches on your name and your firm name are growing. And then you can actually see which of these messages are actually resonating in terms of clicks and calls back from these listings. It really is powerful and to iterate and optimize your content strategy moving forward, because now you can say, hey, look, my audience, they tend to prefer seeing this type of content from me. Let's do more of that. And then of course, just like everything else, you add some new ideas to the mix and try to test against them and beat those winners every time. And that's how you really optimize forward. The questions and answers section is another great way that you can seed information to motivate. So think about all those frequently asked questions, whether it's like the type of cases you handle, or maybe it's driving directions, but it's good for you because it makes it more efficient. The people that are coming to your firm tend to be a little bit better educated about some of those things right in. You can seed those questions right in the Google My Business listing. You can talk about, years of experience or specific practice, like issues that come up in your practice you see all the time. That's really a powerful way to help to distinguish you and position yourself as an expert.
So one thing here that we find, especially with chat conversations, because they're an entire transcript, it really is beneficial for your SEO and for driving that quality traffic of people who are asking questions that they'll ask, and then you'll see in Google Analytics, not provided keyword or NA, right? And then you'll look into your chat transcripts and see all of the questions. Those are probably the questions that someone typed into Google that they're then going to type into your site to find the answer. People are not going through your search. Most law firm websites and service businesses don't have knowledge bases like CallRail or other software companies might. Smith.ai does, for example, but most service businesses and products don't have a help doc section of their website. They have a small FAQ, if that, maybe some disparate blog posts. So if you have chat and you can help that be the source of answers, a basic FAQ, go through those chat transcripts and see what are the most common questions that people are asking, and can you make sure that the right answer is provided always so that Smith.ai can be helpful to you, and then take those and turn them into blog posts, turn them into Q&A. And that's something that, you can do on a variety of other sites, not just, your website and Google.
Really good points. Call transcripts too, if you have them.
Yes. Yeah. If you have them. And I don't know if CallRail does that. They have the recording, so they also provide transcripts.
They can. It's depends if you have that feature on, but yeah, it's really really powerful stuff. I mean, like you had mentioned from a chat, I mean, you can build your entire content strategy around the questions people are asking you on the phone and in your live chat.
And if you have actually call recording, you could use something like Descript or Rev to just get that transcript, which gets you pretty far without human involvement.
Exactly. So, kind of want to give the lay of the land again here. We talked a lot about things you can do to enhancements to stand out. The next biggest section is really in the response, right? So whether it's Smith or whether you have an email autoresponder or multiple things in place, being able to respond, not just, fast is kind of table stakes. People always ask like, well, everybody's talking about response. Well, response is like, everybody should be able to get to a point, even though we know that there's a lot of room for improvement, but the quality of the response matters a lot. And that's another thing that I think we'll talk about as we move forward. But in addition to standing out, the next biggest place that you can improve conversion is in how you're handling intake, not just from a speed, but in a quality. So Maddy, I know this is a big thing in your world. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you know about not just response times, but also how you should be responding?
Yeah, I'll share an infographic that holds true today, even though it was made a few years ago with Clio report data. And what they showed is that 2 out of 3 potential clients base their decision to hire on the initial responsiveness to a call or email. What that says is like, no matter how amazing you are as a salesperson or firm owner or business owner, whatever it is, you don't even get the opportunity to have that conversation unless you pick up. So as Gyi said, that's table stakes, but responsiveness is really more of a matter of content, of channel, and then also like speed. So by content, we mean like, what is the quality of that conversation? And by channel, we mean like if someone's trying to text your number and you don't realize that your number is textable, you're in trouble, right? So most VoIP systems today are going to give you a text-worthy number. If you have a landline, you can use, text request or zip whip or any number of solutions. Smith.ai can text back on your behalf, et cetera. But it's important that you are across all channels, giving an equal response to anyone, no matter their preferred channel of reaching out to you. If you've got a lot of activity on Facebook, that includes being responsive on Messenger, which is also something Smith.ai can do. And we see that, Facebook is also becoming a recommendation engine. So people are asking, on their page instead of on Google or on a local community page. For example, locally, I'm in East Aurora, New York. We have a page where people might ask for a service provider. Who can you recommend? Because that's a local, relatively trusted network of folks who are in your community. If it's a local service, they're going to get a lot of Facebook pages that are recommendations. They're not going to get as many websites directly, and there they are on your Facebook page. So responsiveness across channels and delivering the message is important. If you just have a message taking service, then you're not actually having a quality conversation. You're having a one-way conversation of that person to basically glorified voicemail, which means you really have to look at how can I make that conversation more valuable? What am I empowering my staff to do or my outsourced services to do on my behalf? Can you give them screening questions? Can you make sure that it's at least in the right area, practice area or local service area or both? What is the sense of urgency there, and what is the fit for the specific services they're looking for or the problem or matter they may be dealing with as a fit to your firm? What is their likelihood or interest in actually having an attorney or other service provider help with it instead of a DIY, right? You can ask these questions like, how important is it to you to hire an attorney right now? Or how, on a scale of 1 to 10, would you say ready you are to move forward with an attorney at this point? You can ask those questions, and people rarely do, to say like, this is a cool, warm, or hot lead. They're in the right practice area, right service area. When is the court date scheduled if there's a court date? Have you worked with other attorneys? Yes, I've worked with 3. Okay, maybe you run for the hills. There are a lot of questions you can ask up front that also are not specific personal information that a receptionist or intake service, you probably don't want them to get into those details. So relevant and interesting, but not confidential is really where you want to be at this point.
And the other thing I love that, as we talked about in terms of informing content strategy, but, you start collecting this data, and then you start to analyze which, take all of your qualified leads or take all of your, new clients for the month, and then go and run reports on the chat transcripts and the call transcripts.
Form fills. Yeah.
And you can start to see exactly the types of conversations that are increasing the likelihood that someone hires you. And you want to make sure that those questions get answered and that those conversation points regularly come up. But, a lot of these systems now, you can even say, hey, what percentage of the phone call had like a sentiment on it based on, just like the AI will like read the transcript. But that's the way to optimize forward and say, look, we know that when we have these conversations, they're more likely to convert into clients. Let's have more of these types of conversations.
Yeah, and what page are they happening on? And you can get as granular as, did the chat widget or the phone number appear in a certain color or at a certain point in the page? And, there's always website work that needs to be done. They're never really finished, right? So one of the things that often comes up is, all right, here I am, I've set up all the things that Gyi recommended I set up. Now what? Well, you go and look at those calls or those chats that came in from certain channels, or they landed on a certain page because you were testing which appeals more to my audience. And you lean into the ones that convert better, that provide the information in the way that they're looking to digest it, et cetera. And that's where you say, okay, do we need more FAQ on this page? Do we need testimonials and video on this page? And, are people engaging with it? You can use a tool like Hotjar or things like that to see overall page engagement. Does that matter enough to slow down my site, for example? But CallRail, so they added form tracking. And the one thing that I would say is, with Lawmatics, with whatever form you're using, if you have a conversation and there's a call summary, that's extremely valuable, but it's really important that you have an intake form that's completed, that is the same question every time. Why? For consistency of the handling of that call. It really does ensure that the instructions are followed every single time when there are questions that you have to answer. And that means that the receptionist has to ask them, obviously. And then you can also analyze that data a lot more easily, like how much work is it to get to those, answers or those data points that Gyi's talking about. If you've got an intake form and you can see how many people answer a question with this drop-down item, it's easier for you to review and take action on it than if you have to pour over, all these transcripts of recordings. So I'm very much for the intake form, and I think it's much more actionable than anecdotally trying to pull things out.
No, totally. I mean, I think that's a big message from this talk is that, is getting the infrastructure in place to start collecting the data. That's what we see is missing so many times. So many times when lawyers will come to us and they'll say, what is your target cost per client? And how are you tracking target cost per client from organic search? Or how are you tracking target cost per client from Google Ads or whatever campaign they're running? And a lot of times it's just missing. They're kind of looking at traffic overall, but until you get the infrastructure in place where you've got the numbers that make the most sense for your business, and we talk about this to people like, well, what numbers should I track? Because like we talk about plaintiffs firms, well, some of these cases, they can take years to get to a settlement. And so like target cost per opening a file might be your number. In other contexts, other practice areas, maybe the cycle from inquiry to service to fee is shorter. And maybe you do want to do some short-term like return on investment or return on ad spend. But again, none of this is anecdotal. None of this is, how did you hear about us, right? Conrad and I always get into a debate. Conrad Salmon and I always get into a debate about this. I'm fine asking that question as like a backup, but you know what the answer is? The internet, right? That gives you no granularity at all.
You have to put a little bit of pressure behind it. Like we want to thank the person who referred you if it was an individual or organization. And we get pretty good data, but you really do have to put a little emotion behind it and incentive. And you think about yourself being that client who wants to be thanked, but sometimes that results in some, false negatives where they're like, oh, nobody referred me. And it's like, well, no, but how did you hear about us? Right. So language matters there. The other thing that I wanted to say, I just forgot. I don't know. Oh, I know.
Okay.
Okay. So referrals. So we're talking about metrics, and there's like primary metrics that you're talking about, Gyi, right? So like these are all the things that are immediately driving like meaningful business revenue. And then there's also business or revenue, depending on if you can, take fees for referrals, or if you get business from referrals as a steady stream. But you might also be referring out enough business to really track it seriously. And Gyi, maybe you could talk about how any one of the nurturing systems might handle that as well. I think Womatics probably has a solution in place, but referrals are a secondary and really important thing to track. So you're going to get leads that are not binary yes or no. It's more like yes, interesting, but no, I'm going to refer them, and then no, right? And the more refined your programs are, the fewer of the last one you'll get, the more of the top line. But the second is also interesting, like how many were referred out, that referral is going to bring business to you secondarily, right? And that's not something to sort of laugh at. Yes, you paid for it. You might as well do something good with it and send it out to a firm you recommend who's better suited to handle that lead if you think they're a quality lead for that referral. And that's something that Smith.ai does as well. And we think that that's important for your overall like long-term conversion value, because it does come back to you.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, remember at the outset, we talked about how half of people are going to decide to hire a lawyer based on a referral. And so that's a two-way street. You mentioned a couple of things in there. So one, like absolutely in your CRM, you should be tagging your referred out contacts, right? So whether, if they became, depending on how you want to implement it, maybe they became an opportunity or a matter or whatever system you're in. But whatever that record is, make sure you're maybe use a tag to tag it's a referred out. And then as Maddy mentioned, make sure you understand the referral source, who you referred to, because again, there's a couple of things that I think are really important to either reiterate here or to call out from a impact on your own business. One, as Maddy mentioned, you want to be making sure that the people that you're referring out to are handling those clients well, because those people are being referred by you. And so your reputation's at stake. And so staying in touch with them to make sure that they're having a good experience, that's really, really important. Two is that, like it or not, it's a you scratch my back, I scratch your back world. And so you want to be able to have a system in place to say, hey, look, we've referred out 20 cases to this firm. What kind of experience are they giving their clients, and are they coming back to us, and what kind of fee are they able to generate? In the context of PI, where you're on contingency fees, the value that they're able to obtain for that client is going to directly impact your fee if you're on a referral fee basis with them. The other one that people don't think about as much is the impact of this nurturing on and this referring on reviews of your own firm. So I can tell you, my friend Ken Levinson in Chicago, he gets reviews on his Google My Business platform that are like, Ken was super empathetic. He listened to me and my issues. And even though he realized he wasn't the right lawyer for me, he got me in touch with somebody who could help. Like he turned that in a situation where it was an inquiry that wasn't a case for him, that turned into a referral for someone else, a review for his own firm, and now has also created a relationship with that person that originally contacted him on a high degree of trust, because he spent the time to actually listen to them and show some empathy. And so, and again, all this stuff that's going on, the way these tools come into play is your CRM, you should have reports where you're like, when am I, who are my top referral sources? Am I checking in with them on a regular basis? Am I getting a nudge to shoot them an email? Do I have, email campaigns that are designed to stay more active? Am I sending them emails on birthdays and holidays? And then the other thing that I wanted to mention in this context is some of those contacts that come in that we talked about. Yeah, they're not going to be, they're not ready to hire you today. That's where you're nurturing them, right? So now that you've got the system in place, you can say, all right, I'm going to send them they've opted in to receive messages from me, and I'm going to send them, whether it's, hey, here's something important that I think you need to know about dealing with a divorce, or there's a change in law, or there's something you're doing at your firm. Staying in touch, that longer term nurture makes a huge difference in improving your conversion to clients.
Yeah, and that's something to track as well, right? So if you know how many touches it takes to convert someone who is ready and who just needs that extra call or email, that invoice sent again or whatever it might be, or it's someone who, has a lot of stakeholders at the table, or some uncertainty or some other things going on in their life that are distractions, or has to get the money together. Those are all things that also set up different timelines along with whatever practice area it is. So, your metrics are not like one size fits all. If you have multiple practice areas and maybe it's family law and immigration, if it's a divorce or child custody or visa issue, or anything could have a different timeline attached to it. So don't say, oh, are my leads converting within 30 days? That might not be the appropriate time frame to consider for that type of case. So if you use a system like Lawmatics, for example, you can overlay these tags together to get something that is actually more actionable from that overlapped data. It's this case type, and it's this conversion rate within this period of time, which is 30 days longer than maybe your typical child custody case or whatever it is. So think about the sense of urgency, but then also the actual movement and pace that these cases have.
Such a good point. And, and we are, the data's everywhere. And that's kind of another theme of this conversation. There's so much data. And so you get these industry reports and these benchmark studies, and they do have value. They can show you directional trends, but I talk about this all the time. Trust your own data, get your systems in place. Your firm's unique. Your campaigns are unique. The audiences you're trying to track are unique. And so it's not like, oh, well, an industry standard click-through rate or an industry standard conversion rate. It's all over the map. And you should be working on, just like we talk about in other contexts of our personal lives, compete with yourself, right? Compete with your own firm, improve the conversion rate for your firm. Don't measure yourself against a firm down the street or a friend, because again, the way they're doing things, the financials of their business, all of these things play a role in what works for your business. And so like when we talk about things like a target cost per acquisition, like how much money or time can you spend to get a new client, you should be thinking that in the context of your own firm's finances, not in an industry report or even a Clio report for that matter. Use that industry benchmark data to guide you, but really focus on your own data, do your own testing, see what works best for your firm.
Awesome, Gyi. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time today. I know we all do. So if anyone wants to reach you, first of all, I will share your contact information proactively with everyone who registered and when the video is uploaded. But what's the best way to get in touch with you and your team? Probably
just email me, gyi@AttorneySync.com. But I waste a lot of time on Twitter. You can check out the Lunch Hour Legal Marketing Podcast. But I love talking shop about this stuff, so don't hesitate to reach out. And Maddy, thanks again so much. Really appreciate this conversation.
Awesome. Thank you. My pleasure having you. And thanks for joining us today. Take care, everyone.